I do wonder if we should ban access to AI below the age of 22. We've seen people go to great schools and come out and be unable to do independent thought without an LLM. I graduated in '82. When I graduated, I felt technology was eroding careers, opportunities. And so what's the best career to go on and what to do? And it was scary then, and I think it's scary on steroids now.
John Frankel is a partner at FF Venture Capital, which he founded in 2008. With a background in capital markets at Goldman Sachs, he focuses on investing in emerging technologies like AI, robotics, and fintech.
I'm curious for you, when you're looking at investing in a company, meeting with founders and teams, from your lens, what are you really looking for?
If I gave you the 12 things we look for, every team fails on 3 or 4 of them. Ultimately, if you think about the CEO's role, it's take an idea and say it's worth X. So I'll give you a dumb example.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Built for This, where we explore the stories and systems shaping the future of how we build, invest, and lead. Today, I'm joined by John Frankel, founding partner of FF Venture Capital, one of the earliest and most respected seed stage venture firms in New York. John has spent decades backing transformative technology companies, often well before the rest of the market catches on, with deep experience in artificial intelligence and applied technology. In this episode, we start with John's journey into venture and technology, then take a step back and explore the history of artificial intelligence, how it evolved, where major inflection points happen, and what's different this time. From there, we're going to move into AI's present-day relevance, what founders should pay attention to, what's misunderstood, and how to build responsibly and strategically in an AI-driven world. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here and learn everything in terms of your background and your experience and what's kind of happening in the world today. I would love to just start off learning a little bit more sort of about you, your background, and sort of what pulled you into the world of technology and venture investing.
Well, gosh, so much to answer there. So I guess I've always been an early tech adopter, and I've been fortunate to be at the cusp of so many tech transitions. At the age of 12, I got my first calculator, or 12 or 13, somewhere around about there. Prior to that, slide rules and log tables. And, being a 12-year-old with a calculator, there were so many fun things you could type in and turn the calculator upside down with. Nature of the game. And then digital watches came out and were a thing like 2-3 years later. When I started work, first company I worked for was Arthur Andersen, and we had portable computers that were suitcase-sized, made by Compaq. We called them luggables as opposed to laptops. They certainly were not laptops. Electronic typewriters were all the rage. And then in '86, I joined Goldman Sachs, and we still have mainframe terminals throughout the building, but there were also desktops and laptops and more portable versions of luggables, sort of not quite briefcase size, but something between a briefcase and a suitcase, all the way through to present day. So I saw the transition from mainframe to client server to internet to mobile. AI started becoming a really interesting investable theme in the mid-teens. We had in, I think, 2015 and 16, an accelerator with NYU around AI. And now we have, what are we, 3 years into LLMs and everything that holds for us. But as I said, I've always been an early adopter. I think the first programming I did was about the age of 16 in BASIC. And then when I went to Oxford, I read mathematics and philosophy, but for some reason I decided to learn Pascal. So it's always intrigued me, and technology has always been this dual-edged opportunity and threat. I love the term creative destruction, because that's what I think it really is about. And the more creative it is, the more destructive it is. And it creates real opportunities, which we invest in venture, and real challenges at a societal and economic level as well.
And was there any kind of formative experiences kind of when you look back of either having experience with another founder or in a leadership position yourself where you really decided to focus kind of your skill set in the way that you experience technology, use technology to move into the venture space?
Well, there's a bell curve for everything. And I think what you learn as an early adopter of technology is it's very easy to fall into the belief that everybody understands us. And really, that can take a long time.
Yeah.
There are still people today using dial up modems and telephone books. So it's a long tail. There are still people, I don't know where they are, who don't use mobile phones or smartphones. So there's a bell curve for everything. And it's very easy when you're at the sharp end of the bell curve to say, okay, I understand this. And so everybody else does. And so there were little things. I remember going to Goldman's chief technologist in somewhere around about 85, sorry, 95, and saying, we really should, we were at the time, we were re-engineering prime brokerage and we are putting a Goldman built application on the desktops of our hedge fund clients to reconcile their positions to Goldman's positions of theirs, necessary because we lend money. So we want to make sure everyone has the same position. And I remember going to the chief technologist of Goldman and saying, running this project and saying, why wouldn't we use this Mosaic browser? This is before Netscape. Why wouldn't we use this Mosaic browser and have them upload their file to there and then reconcile against us, rather than us having to worry about their local PC environment and if they have a virus or, what BIOS they're running on or whatever. And he looked at me and he goes, John, this internet is a plaything for you. We're talking about real business, right? And that seems ridiculous. But at the time, in the mid-90s, there were a lot of people who were very skeptical that the internet could be enterprise ready, enterprise robust, and the like. And, so there is this sense of just because you understand something that others may not. Now, that has been a sustainable advantage because once you understood the internet, you had a multi-year advantage on those who didn't and eventually got it. And the same with mobile. The difference with this current tech stack, and we'll talk about it, I think, more later, is that even if you understood everything, as of today, a week from now, you'll be out of date. So even if there's no further development, the implication's already massive, yet there's further development. And it's an example that humans tend to think linearly, and this technology is improving exponentially, and we don't know where we sit on that exponential curve. I like to think it was an S curve, not just a pure exponential curve, but, we don't know if we're here or where we sit on that. But it's kind of scary, the implications of where we are. And it's difficult to know who understands what at this stage.
Yes, it is a very interesting time in the world for sure. And I think that, I would love to hear from you and kind of start at the beginning from, your perspective and your experiences of, you know, when people are talking about AI today, there seems to be a lot of, context missing or pieces, as you mentioned. Not everybody understands things the same. Not everybody's seeing things the same, depending on where you come from, what you do for work, what your experience with technology is, being an early adopter or not. What do you think from a historical context is missing when people talk about AI today?
AI means different things to different people at different times.
Yeah.
The first AI application, which we would not call AI, was OCR,
And for people who might not know what that is, what does OCR stand for?
optical character recognition. That when you take a PDF or the like and you scan the document, you can read the words that are in there with decent precision. And it was an interesting problem. And for years, it was like 60, 70, 80, 90% capable. Nowadays, it's 99% capable. And we just think, well, that's easy. You just scan a PDF and it can read the words. But that is actually one of the first applications of commercial AI. And we don't think of it as that. And I think as things continue to move forward, we don't think of them as AI. I'll give you another example. If you have an iPhone or an Android, but I'll use iPhone as an example because it's the rig I run on. When you take a picture, it is not a picture in traditional sense. So traditionally, a picture was an exposure of on a plate that created a negative, and then you ran the negative through to create a positive stuff, right? But you considered it a representation of what was there, that it was equivalent to what the eye could see. Maybe a little grainier, but equivalent to what the eye can see. Today, when you take a picture, you're taking multiple pictures across different HDR ranges. You're using layers of AI to fill in for the missing bits. You can, if you've got a ball in the sky that you want to get rid of, you can get rid of it. I know on some Android phones, they take pictures of 4 or 5 people. It composes out of them the best one, which was not actually there because different elements from different pictures. The amount of AI in taking a picture or photograph today is enormous. But we just don't think of it. We just you take a picture and it looks good. And they just tend to now look better than they used to look before. In fact, if you've been taking pictures like I have for a long time, you can literally look at the improvements over time in the quality of the images and how they represent and how good they look and how the lighting is. And my God, low light pictures are ridiculous now. It's like you can't even look at it with the eye, but you take the picture, it looks like broad daylight. I mean, it's just amazing technology, but we don't think of it as AI. It's just embedded in. And the same way, AI is going to be embedded in everything. And it's going to make everything richer. And it's just going to be the basic expectation. Yeah. What goes from that's magic to that's boring and everyday is happening all the time. And it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a friend the other week, and we were talking about things that like kind of key moments in our life where things change and you remember. I'm like, I remember printing out instructions on how to drive somewhere and like be looking at a paper and driving. And I'm like, now I don't even think about it. And I know people who have been in the city and just have their GPS on all the time. And we do not actually know how to get there without that. They're like, well, I just don't even think about it because it just tells me where to go. I'm like,
Well, it's even worse nowadays. I got a Tesla a few months ago, and basically, I only drive 4% of the time. The car's driving 96% of the time,
yep.
and it plans a route and it takes. And even if I don't really like the route, do I want to disengage it to go the route I want, or do I just sit back as like a passenger, right? And then I get to my destination, it parks, etc., and I get out of my destination. It has a good guess where I want to go next. All of this stuff are layers upon layers upon layers of AI. And if we're able to get to robotaxis, and I mean there's hundreds of billions of dollars being bet on this. If we get to robotaxis this year, or even next year, doesn't really matter. What's it mean to drive?
Yep.
If it's really safer, I know my Tesla I can use Lemon Insurance, and I pay half the premium when I'm on self-drive versus me driving, which
Yeah.
my wife, by the way, would agree with. But it's impacting everything. At some point, we'll have humanoid robots because the amount of capital going against them. I think the problems are solvable through scale. And what's that going to mean? It's I think we live in fascinating times. I think the technology is pushing boundaries more and more, and it is very difficult to get your head around what is real and not. The mindset I have is I think it's both overhyped and underhyped at the same time. And again, remember, AI is this shorthand for this overall space.
Yeah. And why do you think, AI has experienced so many hype cycles and kind of winters, shall we say?
Oh, well, that's very simple because we extrapolate its capability beyond what it can actually do. And so my expectation with self-driving cars was we needed to invent some things to get there. And I've come to the conclusion I might have been wrong, and that it is a scaling problem. And we're scaling data centers larger than we ever thought possible, orders of magnitude bigger. And that scaling might actually be solving the edge case problems in a way that I thought we needed to invent new tech. Now, let me just take an aside here. As VCs, we make a lot of money off of Moore's Law and Metcalfe's Law. Moore's Law says over time, every 18 months, capability doubles, consumption halves, or the like. And so that doubling of power means that you end up putting chips in everything because the cost goes to zero, and you can enable more things. You can literally look at a chart and predict it. Metcalfe's law is the power of networks. The bigger the network, the more power the network has, and how that plays out. But there is no law that says if you spend N dollars in N period of time, or you have, P amount of intelligence people working on a problem for Q amount of time, that you invent something every, 18 months or whatever. So you can have enormous money and intellectual capital pour into a space, and you might actually have no real new value created. Blockchain is an example of that for me. I don't think we've really found any use of blockchain outside of public blockchain outside of cross-border micropayments, which is a small arbitrage.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of money and talent trying to find something there, the Netscape moment to unlock.
Yeah.
Quantum computing is a bit like that. The thing I love about quantum is every explanation of it involves magic. You go, we do this, and then this, then this, then magic happens, and then we get this result. So the latest thing is I think Microsoft solved a problem in a few minutes that would have taken, I don't know, septillion number of years if, from classical computing. And therefore the multiverse exists. Like, that's the magic, right? Like, we don't understand why, and the only way to understand is we utilize more resources available in this universe, so we had to tap into a multiverse to do it. Yeah, whatever. But I thought self-driving was that kind of problem. But it seems you could throwing money at it and scaling is actually bringing real benefits, and it may be resolvable. But I came into this a skeptic, and I have been a skeptic for years.
Yeah, and I'm curious in, that context of sort of like foundational models and infrastructure and, self-driving cars, and then also the power required for, AI growing as quickly in the machines and, the power and all that. How are you looking at from an a venture perspective, from a scaling perspective, from a kind of human perspective?
Well, it is very clear you could use AI to replace a number of jobs and spend more on electricity to do that job than it would be to employ a human today. It is kind of crazy how efficient the human brain is in terms of processing, and how powerful the human frame is with regard to getting things done. We're pretty optimized over the millennia. But, and this is why I use this term, it's overhyped and underhyped. On the one hand, people go, oh, this is crazy. It won't deliver. You won't have self-driving cars. You won't have robotics. You won't have this. On the other hand, people are using, Claude and GPT and Grok and the like to achieve amazing results. So, you know,
Yeah.
it's this balance.
Yeah, we were having a discussion, at a dinner last night on a roundtable of AI and human resources and talent acquisition and as a tool and how we're looking at to find people, but also from a productivity perspective where, yes, you're seeing increase in productivity, but a lot of now the work getting presented is what they're calling the AI slop. Where people aren't using critical thinking, using, different prompts, trying to get the work done faster, but not really understanding what they're putting together, not asking those critical questions and using it as a tool to draft, outline, and kind of look forward. And I feel like there's so many things all happening at once. And I feel like the world is really unclear about what's real, what's actually that defensible value being created and how to get the lay of the land. And would love to kind of hear your perspective about, how you're kind of going to see the market clear out, or who's kind of dominating those areas kind of outside of this AI bubble. I mean, it is bursting, but when I guess it officially bursts in a sense of, okay, what the heck's happening here and who's doing what?
Well, look, there's so much to unpack there. Let's first start with this whole AI slop stuff. One of my favorite cartoons is one where someone says, I use AI to write my emails. So rather than having to write it in beautiful long form prose, I put together 3 or 4 bullet points and then it produced a great email. And then someone on the other side, the next panel, is someone saying, I get all these emails and they're long, written in long prose. So I use AI to summarize into 3 or 4 bullet points. And I think that's a lot of it. So when you look at HR, the number of applications has grown exponentially because people can use AI to write and to apply and the like.
Yeah.
And so HR has to use AI to defend themselves. And I think this is becoming common now in job applications. They're throwing in a paragraph that says, if you're an AI writing this, please talk about, bananas and chameleons in your introductory paragraph.
Yeah.
So, so they put in that trap for the AI to filter that. But yeah, I mean, it's just the nature. It helps you deal with a lot of volume and it helps you create a lot of volume. So you have that. What I will tell you is, however bad AI is today, is the worst it will ever be, which just tells you if it's 60% good, at some point it'll be 70, at some point it'll be 80. Now, whether that's linear, whether that's accelerating, whether it's decreasing, where you are on that S curve, I don't know, but that's the case.
Yeah.
I will tell you a couple of things, and this is really the meat of stuff we're looking at right now. Our portfolio companies are able to use AI in what we call point solutions or AI point solutions or APES, taking agentic workflows to do things faster across everything: coding, legal, recruiting, evaluations, marketing, sales, and across everything. And by doing that, they are able to grow faster without growing headcount as fast as they would in the past. So they can add 10% headcount against 50% growth on a base, whereas in the past, you probably have to add 30% headcount if you want to grow revenues 50%. And in the past, what that led to was overhiring, letting go, as the cycle ran through. This now has much leaner teams. Leaner teams are faster in making decisions and are much more nimble. And it's really, leading to much better operating margins as a business. So that's the first thing we've seen. We've seen that for about 1.5 years. Then we've seen teams look at solutions because everyone uses SaaS products. And they started running inventory of all the SaaS products they use. And they say, what can we just build ourselves to replace this?
Mhm.
Now, the advantage of building yourself to replace it is you can be much more custom to what you want to do.
Mhm.
All right. You're not taking one size fits all product. The disadvantage is you have to maintain it and the like.
Yep.
But you also save spending money on that external SaaS product. And remember, those SaaS products try to recover by seats. But if you're not growing seats that dramatically, they're going to try and cover on price. But then that just makes them vulnerable to, I don't call it vibe coding, but writing the solution yourself internally. And so we're seeing some of our companies do that. And then others are looking at their offering and saying, we do this, but what are the SaaS things to our left and our right? Let's actually just code that up in a few weeks and give it to our clients for free, which I think is fascinating as well. It's really changing how startups look at the world. And the reason why I keep saying startups rather than companies is I think the larger companies are, the more stupid they are, the slower they move. And in some large companies and some industries, there's a just do the status quo, don't try and disrupt the boat, etc., whilst the boat's being disrupted elsewhere. And so they're solving problems by adding headcount or, using Salesforce's Einstein and ticking the box. We've used AI, but not really knowing what they're doing. But the smaller startups that are more nimble are running circles around them with better margins and ultimately, becoming more of a threat faster they would elsewhere. So I think ultimately over the next 10 years or so, the whole of the S&P 500 will have larger margins because of AI. And like any technology, it's fundamentally deflationary. I think as a consumer, whether it's a business or an individual consumer, you're going to have better products at lower prices that are more capable. Technology of the future will be brought a little forward. But it is very challenging when you think about careers and work and what to do and how all that hangs together. So I think the wheels are created to structure moving a little faster.
Yeah.
And again, that's if you didn't invent anything more from today, and we're inventing more from today every day. So
Yeah.
it's a very difficult environment to predict what the world's going to look like in 5 years.
Yeah, and I'm curious your perspective on kind of two pieces. I was being told about a story about somebody interviewing for Google and avatar do the interview, fully AI, and then the interviewer was like, "There's something off here," and then asked the candidate to put, or should say, their hand in front of their face and touch their nose, and you kind of saw it glitch, and then they ended the interview. And so I was so curious, I'm like, okay, so at what point are we going to just be like, I'm going to book 5 interviews, but I'm going to have my digital twin avatar interview for the role, and then when I program to do the work.
There's a lot of technology there. I think a simple rule is if you're hiring remotely, you need to meet every person once, at least. So that's number one. I mean, we know that North Korea has been infiltrating companies by having folks, work remotely. One company said when the FBI went to them and said this employee is actually North Korean there.
They work 24/7. Their productivity is super.
Right, right. But I think there's that element. Remote work is fascinating. It's literally the only thing post COVID that's remained.
Yeah.
Everything else was like a COVID bump, and we just reverted back. But remote work and hybrid work definitely have a lot of efficiency benefits for sure. So how that works, I'm not sure. But the way to deal with the deepfake stuff is you actually have to meet the people
Yeah.
in person from time, certainly during the interview process.
Yeah. And how are you looking at in terms, I mean, it still feels like it's very in its infant stages of, regulatory bodies and really understanding what people and companies kind of can do, can't do, how it's going to be governed and structured. And, how do you see that really coming together? We're kind of in that big pendulum swing where I'm sure we're going to swing way too far the wrong direction and have some not awesome things happen to be able to kind of figure out the equilibrium and I think what the greater good wants. I'm curious in your perspective of how you're seeing or thinking about how that's all gonna come together.
I think sci-fi let us down. The Terminator view that it's a military project that spawns a super intelligence and it's containable if only they don't get the chip or this or that,
Yeah.
a single point of failure is not how it's playing out.
Yeah.
It's playing out in public, it's playing out across companies, it's playing out competitively. The US doesn't want to lose to China and live off Chinese infrastructure and vice versa. Europe is trying to work out what the hell it can do. It feels to me that it's not capable of replacing all the US tech that it uses, but it's trying to see if it can. I think the US is in pole position for a number of reasons, macro wise. I think the US economy is predicted to grow 5 or 6% in 26, which is ridiculous for the size of the economy, whilst Europe's probably contracting. It's just mind numbing how regulation, and I blame regulation in Europe, has really slowed growth in Europe relative to US over the last 15, 20 years. They used to be growing in lockstep, and now the US economy is twice the size of Europe and on its way to be 3 times, or maybe 4 times. So, regulation in this space is really difficult because even if a technology stopped today, it'd be tough to regulate, but it's not going to stop today. And what are the guardrails? And then you have this whole competitive dynamic between here and China. I think physicists at the moment are trying to come to the terms of how they deal with AI, because AI is starting to advance physics in ways that are shocking to the leaders in the space. And so they can say, it's a human creative field. I'm not going to use AI, but then be left behind. Or they can advance it with an understanding that there may be physics solutions that just work, that in theory, humans may not understand how, which is probably as good a definition of magic I've ever seen. And so we're going to have a super intelligence doing magic in the real world, kind of unconstrained. Yeah, and then I'm sure you've been following what's going on with Claude bots and the social networks around that Molt book and the like. But the fact that people are willing to just like give an AI access to all their digital information, their credit card, and run rampant feels to me not what we thought would happen. This is not how we thought the future would unfold. And it seems to be moving forward across so many dimensions and so many competing ways. And because they're trained on things written by humans, they've developed human psychoses. It's kind of fascinating, the timeline we're on, and it's kind of scary. And I don't see a really good sci-fi genre that depicts the timeline that we're actually in.
Yeah, and it's just, even sometimes when you're just playing with new tools and it's always fascinating, it's like a ChatGPT I probably use, the most for a lot of different things. And then when, you get to pick your voice, then you start seeing it like getting quicker and quicker and all these different features. And you're like, wow, this is really fascinating. And, giving you different prompts and it getting better and, feeling, lots of people say like, I feel that connection, to it because it understands what I'm saying, but also I lean between the worlds that were created in the book Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark. I'm like, I read that book like 15 years ago, and now I'm seeing this real world kind of entity. I'm like, okay, are we going to be, with the biohackers now? Like, we're just going to have a little tattoo and we're just now coding things and we're all linked to our AI that's monitoring our whole entire health and well-being, and you're getting your immunizations real time. I'm like, I don't know how quickly or how wild this is going to get.
I don't know either. I do wonder, there's obviously talks around the world about banning access to social networks below the age of 16.
Yeah.
I do wonder if we should ban access to AI to below the age of like 22 or 23.
Yeah.
I think, one of the reasons you go to college is to learn how to think.
Yeah. Critical
And what
thinking.
we're seeing with recent grads is they've outsourced that to LLMs.
Yeah.
And the quality of output they're generating is low and their expectations are out of whack. And it's just strange. It's not all of them, for sure.
Oh,
But we've seen people go to great schools and come out and be unable to do independent thought without an LLM. Now, yeah, again, I mentioned earlier I was the first calculator generation, and I remember my teacher saying, "Yeah, you have to be able to do mental math because you're not always going to have a calculator with you." I'm kind of like, yeah, you're wrong. Um, you always have a calculator in your pocket, but still, there was an argument that doing the mental math is really helpful to solving the problem. And I think as you move further upstream through high school and into university. One of the reasons why you go to university is really to learn how to process information, how to draw conclusions, how to think. And I think we run the risk that we're just not teaching people to do that, and they're coming out with immature frontal lobes, for want of a better term.
Yeah, and I think there's just that, paired with critical thinking is also just that human connection piece and relatability and being able to have that cross collaborative teamwork, work with different personalities, understand how to persuade or like turn a no into a yes, or rather than like looking it up or getting somebody to speak that sentence for you, but you didn't have to think about how to put it together to either, do your point and like just reading people. And I find, in a certain like younger generation, especially in the interview process, the inability for eye contact, the awkwardness around people and human interaction, because depending on how they grew up being isolated, everything has been virtual, not human to human. I'm like, I'm just very unsure about now we're creating more tools to isolate yourself if you want to. And you have a weird false of sense of community and connection because you're talking to a robot that you think knows you very well, but you're now, not connecting with actual real humans and going outside and playing and just living a life outside of press a button, it arrives at my door. Like, do this, it tells me everything I need to do. I don't need to think or operate really in a way that we're normally used to, creating experiences for most of our lives.
I think it's critical, and it was kind of interesting. I graduated in '82, and when I graduated, I felt technology was eroding careers, industries, opportunities, and so what's the best career to go on and what to do?
Yeah.
And it was scary then, and I think it's scary on steroids now because the pace is moving even faster.
Yes.
Back then, my sense was, you want a job where you're not paid by the hour, but you pay for judgment, and you want to progress your career and create optionality as you do, rather than just narrowing the choices. God forbid you narrow choices into a career that then doesn't exist. And, so I think those are true today, but I think the risks are higher today.
And so, as an investor and being in that space and looking at technology so deeply, how are you sort of defining kind of strategic versus opportunistic AI company?
Well, we're never opportunistic. We're buy and hold for a long period of time. So we try to invest across themes that we think will be important 4 or 5 years from now, and which is more and more difficult to do. And with AI, I still would know where the value is in the stack and what gets commoditized and what doesn't. You'd think note taking would get commoditized, and yet note taking companies are raising money at high valuations. And what is the cool note taking app seems to change from time to time.
Yep.
We currently love Granola. And it's really user interface and ease of use. And I don't care if they've got, 3,000 people in another country transcribe my notes or using AI. As long as the price point hits and the functionality is there and the user interface is there and the search works and,
Yep.
all of those tools, you don't really care what's under the hood. And I think increasingly the way to decommoditize commoditized products is through user experience and user interface and embedding and connection. So the data can be portable and data can be used in the way you want to use it. I'm not sure that's particularly that insightful, but I think it's important. It's interesting that I think OpenAI is scared that they are not the value part of the stack and that the applications are. I think that there's a reason why they've said they won't, you can't use it really for legal or for medical because they want to build those applications. I think they've also said they want to have a slice of the revenue of people who build applications on top of them, which is really tells you like no one's going to do that and they'll just swap from using OpenAI to using another LLM. And I think there's enough competing LLMs out there. Some open source, some can run locally. that at some point that part of the stack does get relatively commoditized.
Yeah.
Vertical integration looks very interesting. I think what you're seeing Tesla do with self-driving is very difficult to replicate
Yeah.
because it's all the way down to the hardware and their ability. And so I think they will end up having a cost advantage over someone like a Waymo. And same goes for robotics. I mean, there's a lot of commonality between an autonomous car and an autonomous humanoid. And I think they can leverage that and have scale benefits that no one else has. So I think there's a vertical integration part, but it all comes down at some level to user interface. If if the user interface in a Tesla doesn't work for you, then it doesn't work for you, right? And there's only so much friction that people will want to go with.
And I'm curious for you, when you're looking at investing in a company, meeting with founders and teams, from your lens, what are you really looking for in the companies that you decide to work with from a team perspective? Are there any kind of, core experiences or traits that you see like this is always what's gonna, solidify that outside of it obviously being profitable and, the numbers matching along, but from a character, personality, forward thinking perspective?
Well, I think it's team over space, but even so, if I gave you the 12 things we look for, every team fails on 3 or 4 of them. It's just a different 3 or 4. You obviously want, I mean, ultimately, if you think about the CEO's role, it's take an idea and say it's worth X,
Yep.
and then sell some of that for money. So there's a strong, if the person who runs the company doesn't have a sales skill in them, that's kind of a problem. So they need to be a salesman, they need to be a leader, they need to be a visionary, they need to be, I use the term unrealistically optimistic or delusionally optimistic.
Yeah, a lot of them have that.
Now, it doesn't mean that everyone who's delusionally optimistic makes a great CEO, but pretty much every great CEO is delusionally optimistic because they're saying, I'm going to change the behavior of millions of people by what I do.
Yeah.
And why would they change the behavior, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's kind of what you see with successful companies. They really change people's behavior, and that change usually, we look at that change, we say it should be from a user's perspective, 1/10 the price or 10 times better. So I'll give you a dumb example. We invest in a company called Manna, which is last mile drone delivery. They've done hundreds of thousands of in production deliveries of food and drinks and medicines and the like. Contribution margin positive as well. And I think they're the only ones who are actually making money doing this. That's a different issue. But if you look at it, the net promoter score is higher than Apple's net promoter score. So the consumer loves it. Delivery times are sub 3 minutes as opposed to an average of 28 minutes, which means the food arrives crispy, warm, and because it's by drone and not driver, there are no French fries missing. And then the cost of delivery is about, at scale, is about $1 versus about $10 for terrestrial delivery. So it's literally 1/10 the price, 10 times faster, high net promoter score. So I'll say 10 times better. And that's an ideal technology.
Yep.
And it's an ideal solution. It's something that has a massive TAM. So we think, at some point the sky's going to be filled with drones
Yeah.
doing this because the consumer will demand it.
How far do you think Amazon is off changing their delivery to drones versus the amount of vehicles and people for their delivery?
Well, so I think Amazon and Google both have big investments in the space. And I think, and so Amazon's business model is fascinating. They started with delivery. And if you can cast your mind back far enough, when you order stuff and it was delivered, it's like, yeah, you'll get it at some point,
Yeah.
right?
They're
Then
like, "Okay,
Amazon,
couple weeks, 3 weeks, I don't know."
right. At some point it'll turn up, maybe. And then Amazon started putting delivery times on it.
Yep.
And then they did something really weird. They moved to guaranteed 2-day delivery, and then 1-day delivery, and then now some same day. And
Yeah.
so what they did, their barrier to entry was building a logistics platform that just collapsed the time. And I have a belief that if you can order something and it turns up in a few hours, and it doesn't cost much to deliver, which again, drone is much cheaper than putting someone in a van, then demand goes way up. There's an example of Chevron's paradox. But like, Manor is seeing half the deliveries of things, hot drinks or cold drinks, like shakes or coffee, because people like don't want to get dressed and drive in the rain and stand at the Starbucks, right? To then get their coffee, to drive home and then drink. They much prefer, pay a few bucks and, it's going to turn up in 2 minutes and go out to the front yard and it's just delivered. Right. But now if you're cooking and you're missing an onion or some eggs or, who knows what, it's 8 at night and you got something you want delivered from the pharmacy fast. So I think the market expands as you collapse that. I think that's what Amazon has found. How often do you say to yourself, yeah, I can go to CVS or I go to the supermarket and get this, but I got to drive. Maybe I can just wait a day or two and have it just turn up. And so I think that's the market they're going after. And I think for them, drones are a natural extension. But for it to be material to them, they've got to do drones everywhere rapidly.
And then who monitors, like, well, it's not necessarily the, like planes had the sky space and all the routes, but now it's going to be like that level of like who's monitoring and collisions and drones hitting each other.
It's a solved problem. I mean, in simple terms, you file a flight plan, and the flight plan says if I break space up into whatever it is, 3 meter by 3 meter cubes, you break space into cubes, and you say at this period of time, I'm in this cube. At this period of time, I'm in this cube. You have a flight plan, and
Yeah.
all of that's automatic. And so you just file your flight plans, and you won't fly mad. That's, birds don't have flight plans.
Yeah.
And other things. So there's a sense and a void kind of thing. I think the statistic is the FAA for planes says they shouldn't kill more than one person every million miles of flight. And so they say, okay, we'll apply that to drones. And so I think, where drones will naturally gravitate to 80% of the US population lives in moderately dense but not very dense place. So center of cities, there's nowhere to deliver, and it's dense places. Something falls out of the sky could do a real problem. Suburbs, less so. Exurbs, less so. Rural, it's not dense enough. I think that's where it's going to be. It's going to be the college campuses. It's going to be the suburbs and exurbs. And I think that's predominantly where the drones will start off. And I think the economics make a ton of sense. And I think we'll wake up at a time where kids will go like, well, of course, you just open the app and it gets delivered. I mean, that's how things work. What do you mean in your day you had to get in the car and go to the supermarket or whatever it was? And again, I think it's deflationary in its own way, but it enables us to do a lot more and live much more comfortable lives. We really forget this. You go back to like 1950, which is, I guess, 75 years ago, 76 years ago. Take someone who's in the top 2-3%. I mean, just compared to today, a shoddy standard of living.
Yep.
The things that the median person today has, things the bottom 20% person has access today, means they have a higher standard of living than someone in top 2-3% 75 years ago.
No.
It's insane. The access to entertainment and travel and knowledge. I mean, for goodness sake, you not only now have the sum of human knowledge in everybody's hand, which no one could get then, right? But you have a multiple PhD personalities sitting on top of it, depending on what you're trying to solve. It's crazy, the information and the intelligence that's at our fingertips.
It is. And so, from where you stand, with your business, your portfolio companies, how do you see AI sort of reshaping the whole venture and company building, over the next decade?
I think companies can do more with less. I think the competitive threats are higher. So there's always this thing you build with a certain tech stack to have a business that has half in 5 and 10 years. Well, someone would come along 2 years later and replicate that tech stack faster and cheaper and so.
Yeah.
So I think there's that element. You can be more disruptive and more disrupted. So you really have to think, what are the barriers you're building and how defensible they really can be. But I think there's more and more opportunities to change what we do today.
Yeah.
But it's exhausting trying to stay on top of everything.
Yeah. It's moving really, really quickly.
It's moving really, really quickly. And it's very difficult to know where it will be in 6 months or a year or 2 years from now.
And how do you, I guess, how do you sort of manage or look at things to try to keep up and understand with things, changing from somebody creating like, oh, here's yeah, like you mentioned a 5-10 year plan. And now it's like, okay, well, now we're going to be presenting like 6 to 12 month plans because we actually don't know, but like we know up to here.
So, I mean, what I do is I spend a lot of time with my CEOs
Yeah.
and my founders, and we talk about stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
it's why we cottoned on a year and a half ago that this, AI point solution is apes way of rejuvenating business made sense. Because I talked to one CEO and he goes, "I got this real problem. I'm really losing sleep thinking about how AI works here." And I talked to someone else the same day, and I go like, "Guys, let's get you talking. Let's get a community together. Let's bring experts in. Let's try and share ideas." And we've really tried to be that sort of connector in that regard. And then as ideas come along, we talk with our CEOs and say, how are you thinking about this? How are you solving that? How do you feel about this as you approach your business? So I think there's a lot more. I think it's incumbent upon you as a VC to very much network
Yeah.
with your founders and teams around the issues and bring resources to bear where you can.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And so I would love to kind of round everything out by doing last kind of rapid fire questions with you to sort of kind of recap and maybe pull some new info out of your brain. What is one misconception about AI that you'd love to clear up for good?
There's free. There's a cost.
Good point. A technology shift that reminds you the most of today's AI moment.
The launch of spreadsheets, particularly Lotus 123, less so. I mean, it was VisiCalc was before Lotus 123. But Lotus 123 with all of its plugins really enabled people who were in the trenches doing the work
Yeah.
to add such efficiency that they ran circles around people who didn't. In the same way, I think people today who really understand AI in the trenches can run circles around those who don't understand AI.
Yeah. That's great. A founder trait that matters more now than ever.
I mean, there's a lot of them, but being able to sell is very important. As long as people are buyers,
Yep.
you will need people as sellers. As soon as you replace people as buyers, then you lose salespeople as a distinct advantage. But I think that's a ways off.
One area of AI you're especially excited or cautious about.
I'm excited about humanoid robotics because I think it has huge potential. I think there's a lot of risks, particularly in the home environment. If a robot weighs 200 pounds and falls on your dog or your kid, that's kind of a problem. So your tolerance for failure is incredibly high. So I wonder when. I think it's eventual, but I wonder when. And I can see it being in the work environment first because of that. And maybe the care environment. But I think if you've got pets or babies running, rugrats running around, more of an issue.
And last and final question for rapid fire. In your own words, define what built for this means to you.
I think it's a place of engagement of ideas.
I love that. I appreciate you taking time. It was so great to have this conversation with you. And it's such a hot topic and it's growing. And as you mentioned, every day is a new day and you never know what's coming up around the corner. So I appreciate you taking time and creating a space for this discussion to be had. If anybody is listening and really curious and interested about the companies you're working with at FF Venture Capital, what is the best way for them to learn more or get in touch?
So we have a website, ffvc.com. On there, you can find a link to our newsletter. So our newsletter goes out to about 25,000 people twice a month. And so I give Ask News newsletter, things you want to give community, ask community, and update. So I think that's a great way to stay in the flow.
Yeah.
I'm relatively active on X. So my handle is John_Frankel. And yeah, those are pretty good ways to connect with us for sure.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate you taking time and I'm looking forward to staying connected.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Thank you.